I never thought I'd be the one sitting in a diner at midnight, nursing cold coffee, telling a story about a woman who spent 3 days locked in her own bedroom. Life's funny that way. It throws you things you're not ready for, and somehow you end up being the guy who tries to make sense of it all. Her name was Lena. I met her through a friend from church, one of those small potluck gatherings where everyone pretends to like the casserole but nobody really does. She was polite, quiet, the kind of person who listened more than she talked. I remember she laughed at one of my dumb electrician jokes, something about wires having better connections than I did, and it wasn't one of those polite laughs either. It was soft but real, like she hadn't done it in a while. Her husband, Mark, showed up a few minutes later. Tall, confident, the kind of guy who shakes your hand like he's trying to prove something. You ever meet someone who smiles at everyone except their spouse? That was Mark. At first, I didn't think much of it. I've seen plenty of couples with weird chemistry. Some argue like cats and dogs but love each other to death. But there was something in the way Lena looked at him, this tiny flinch when he touched her arm. Not fear exactly, more like permission, like she was waiting to see if she was allowed to breathe. I brushed it off at the time. Told myself I was imagining things. I mean, who am I to judge another man's marriage? But you can feel it when something's off. It sticks to the air, like the smell of burnt toast you can't quite get rid of. Weeks later, I ran into her again at the hardware store. She was standing in the light bulb aisle, staring at the shelves like she was trying to solve a riddle. I said, "Hey," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes this time. She asked me what kind of bulbs were best for bedrooms, and I joked, "Depends, are you trying to relax or expose a crime scene?" She laughed, but then looked down, almost like she regretted it. Then she told me quietly that her husband didn't like when she picked things out without asking him first. Just said it, flat, like she was talking about the weather. I felt this cold twist in my gut. I wanted to say something, but what do you say? Leave him. That's not normal. Words feel small when someone's whole life is sitting on top of them. That night I couldn't shake it off. I've done enough repairs in people's homes to know the look of a broken circuit. It's that blank, flickering stare when something inside's not connecting anymore. And she had that. A few days later, I heard from that same friend that Mark and Lena had canceled all their plans, weren't answering calls. "They're probably just busy," the friend said. "But I don't know, busy doesn't make you disappear." You start to realize how easy it is for people to vanish even when they're still right there, living in the same town, walking the same streets. I think about my ex-wife sometimes, how she slowly started fading out of the room even when she was sitting across from me. Different kind of story, but that same quiet distance. You tell yourself it's just stress, work, life. Then one day you wake up and realize you haven't heard their real laugh in months. I got the call a week later, not from Lena, but from Martha, her neighbor. Sweet old lady, the kind who still brings casseroles to new families. She said she hadn't seen Lena in days, but she'd seen Mark leave for work every morning. Said something felt wrong. I didn't know what to do with that. I'm just a guy with a toolbox, not a hero. But I promised I'd check in, maybe drive by, make sure everything was fine. The next evening I drove by their place. Nice little two-story home on a quiet street, with one of those neat lawns where the grass looks almost fake. The lights were on upstairs, but the curtains were closed tight. I don't know why, but it made my stomach sink. Something about that house felt sealed. I almost knocked, but the idea of Mark answering the door made me think twice. So I drove away, told myself I was overreacting. That night, though, I couldn't sleep. See, when you've lived long enough, you learn to listen to that small voice that tells you something ain't right. It's the same one that's kept me from getting electrocuted more times than I care to admit. The next day, I went back. No car in the driveway. I rang the bell, waited, nothing. I thought about leaving, then heard something faint, maybe a sound, maybe my imagination. I walked around to the side, looked up at the second-floor window, and I swear, for half a second I saw movement. Like someone stepped back into the shadows. I stood there, feeling this weird mix of dread and anger. Anger at her husband, at myself for not doing something sooner. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't have proof. People lock their doors all the time, right? Except this felt different. The house looked perfect, but there was no life inside. That's the thing about control, it doesn't always leave marks you can see. Sometimes it just scrubs the color out of someone's world until everything's beige and quiet. When I finally did hear what happened, I swear my hands started shaking. He'd locked her in their bedroom, took her phone, her keys, everything. Went to work like it was nothing. 3 damn days she sat there, calling for help through a closed door that no one heard. And what killed me was thinking about her sitting by that window, maybe the same one I'd seen movement in, hoping someone, anyone, would notice. I've worked on a lot of houses in my life, and I've seen what happens when something's wired wrong. Electricity doesn't just stay quiet, it hums, it warns you before it burns the place down. But people hide their sparks. They dim themselves until nobody sees the danger. I used to think control meant strength, keeping things in line, making sure everything ran the way it should. But control, real control, the kind Mark had, that's just fear in a suit and tie. I sat in that diner that night thinking about her, thinking about how a lock can't keep the truth inside forever, how a person can look perfectly fine from the outside while falling apart behind the walls. I guess that's why I'm telling this now. Not because I know how to fix it, hell, I couldn't even fix my own marriage, but because silence is its own kind of prison. And maybe, if someone hears this, they'll start knocking on a door before it's too late. I still remember the sound of Martha's voice when she called me again that morning. It was trembling, like she didn't want to say the words out loud. "Daniel," she said, "I think something's really wrong." I was sitting in my truck, halfway through my first cup of coffee, trying to convince myself the night before had been a dream. But the moment I heard her say that, I knew it was. I told her I'd be there in 10 minutes. Truth is, I was there in 5. The air felt heavy when I pulled up, one of those gray mornings where even the light looks tired. Martha was standing on her porch in her old pink robe, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. She pointed at the house across the street, and I swear, it looked even quieter than the day before. No movement, no sound, not even a curtain twitch, just a perfect little picture of nothing. "I've called her phone," Martha said, wringing her hands, "but it goes straight to voicemail. Mark's car left early around 6. She hasn't come out once." I looked at the front door, locked, blinds down. The mailbox was empty. I tried to think logically, tell myself she was sick or maybe had gone somewhere, but that feeling in my gut wouldn't leave. I walked up the steps and knocked hard, waited. Nothing. Knocked again, louder. "Lena, it's Daniel, you okay in there?" Still silence. Just the hum of the neighborhood, birds, a lawn mower in the distance, normal sounds that suddenly felt wrong. Martha whispered, "What if he?" and stopped mid-sentence like saying it would make it real. I didn't want to think it either, but her eyes said what we were both afraid of. I went around back, checking windows, calling her name softly, half expecting someone to yell at me for trespassing. But nobody did. Every window was closed tight, except one on the second floor, the one I'd thought I'd seen movement in before. Curtains drawn, still. I remember staring at that window and feeling this mix of anger and helplessness that I can't quite explain. It's like when you know there's a short in the line somewhere, but you can't find it no matter how many panels you open. Something's wrong, but it's hidden deep. I called the non-emergency line, told them what was happening. The operator asked if I'd seen signs of danger. I said, "No, but I feel it," and she said they couldn't do much without proof. Proof. That word hit hard. I could almost hear Lena's voice in my head, soft, careful, explaining away things that didn't need explaining. Proof? What's proof when you're the only one who feels the current running under the floorboards? I hung up, frustrated, and that's when Martha put her hand on my arm and said quietly, "I'll call anyway." So we waited. Time stretched out weird, like the whole street was holding its breath. I remember little things, a stray cat walking across the lawn, the way my coffee cup rattled slightly in my hand. Then, just when I thought maybe we were overreacting, a faint sound came from the house. I couldn't tell what it was, maybe a knock, maybe nothing at all, but it made the hair on my arm stand up. I called her name again. Lena. It's me, Daniel. No answer. Martha swore she saw a shadow move behind the curtain, but when I looked, it was gone. The cops came about 20 minutes later, two of them, both young, trying to look older. I told them everything, tried to explain the feeling, the silence, the missed calls. They looked skeptical, but they checked the property anyway. One knocked on the front door, called out, then turned the handle. Locked. They circled the house, peeked through a few windows. Nothing. One of them radioed something in, then shrugged. "We'll come back when the husband's home," he said. I wanted to grab him and shake him, tell him she might not have that long. But all I could do was nod and watch them leave, their cruiser rolling away slow, lights off. After they left, I sat on the curb for a while, just staring at the house. The more I looked, the more I saw the little signs. The trash cans pulled too neatly to the curb, the flowers by the window wilting, the mail slot spotless. It was like someone had scrubbed the life out of that place. Martha eventually went back inside, but I stayed. I don't even know why. Maybe part of me thought she'd hear my truck engine and know someone was still there, that she wasn't completely alone. When Mark finally showed up that afternoon, I recognized the sound of his car before I saw it. That clean, expensive hum that doesn't belong in a quiet neighborhood. He parked, stepped out, straightened his jacket like he was walking into a meeting. "Daniel," he said, surprised but calm. "What brings you here?" I kept my voice steady, but my hands were sweating. Martha was worried about Lena. She hasn't seen her in days. He smiled, small and cold. "Oh, she's fine, she's just resting, she hasn't been feeling well." I asked if she could come out for a minute, maybe just say hi. His smile tightened. "She's sleeping," he said. "And I'd appreciate it if you respected our privacy." His tone had that firm edge, the kind that tells you a conversation's over. I looked past him, toward the window, and for a split second I thought I saw movement again. Maybe a hand, maybe light shifting, but Mark stepped forward, blocking my view. "You need something fixed?" he asked, still smiling, voice calm. "Otherwise, I think we're done here." I drove off, but not far. Parked 2 blocks down and sat there, engine off, watching the house through my side mirror. I couldn't shake it. Something in me refused to let it go. Every so often, I thought I saw a flicker of light upstairs, then nothing. My mind started racing with questions I couldn't answer. Was she really inside? Was I losing it? I told myself maybe she was resting, maybe I'd let my imagination get carried away. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't know what to do about it. That night, I went home and tried to distract myself. Watched some old rerun on TV, drank a beer I didn't even taste. Every sound in my house felt louder than usual, the fridge humming, the pipes clicking. Funny how silence can follow you like that. I picked up my phone twice, thinking about calling the cops again, but each time I put it down. Proof. I didn't have proof. I fell asleep on the couch, still wearing my boots. The next morning I woke up to a text from Martha. Just 3 words: "They took her." I didn't understand at first. I called immediately and she told me the police had come back. They'd found her weak, scared, but alive. He'd locked her in that room. I didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat there, listening to her cry on the other end of the line, my own chest tight with something between relief and rage. When I finally hung up, I just sat at the table, staring at my hands. They were shaking again, the same way they did when I worked with live wires. Because that's what this felt like, touching something dangerous and realizing too late that the current had already been running through the walls all along. When I finally saw her again, she looked like a ghost wearing someone else's clothes. The police had taken her to the hospital first, then to her sister's place. I remember standing in that living room with a paper cup of bad coffee in my hands, feeling out of place, like I'd walked into the wrong story. She sat on the couch with a blanket over her shoulders, staring at the floor. Her hair was messy, her face pale, but her eyes, those eyes that used to flinch when someone spoke too loud, they were wide open now, like she was trying to take the whole world in at once. When she looked up at me, she said, "You came." Just 2 words, but the way she said them made my throat tighten. "Yeah," I said, trying to smile. "Of course I did." And for a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was just tired. Her sister, Ruth, hovered nearby, keeping her voice low like the house itself might break if she raised it. She offered me pie. Why do people always offer food when they don't know what else to do? I said no, but she cut me a slice anyway. The smell of cinnamon filled the room, but I couldn't taste anything. I asked what the police had said. Ruth told me they de-arrested Mark, but he was already out on bail, just like that. Locked his wife in a room, and he's sleeping in his own bed 2 nights later. I remember shaking my head, laughing once, short and bitter. "Guess the system's allergic to common sense," I said. Ruth gave me this look, half gratitude, half exhaustion. "She's safe now," she whispered, but even she didn't sound convinced. After a while, Lena started talking, not all at once, but in pieces. Like broken glass, small and sharp. "He said I embarrassed him," she told me. "Said I didn't appreciate him. I'll never forget the day it all hit me like a punch to the gut. I was sitting in Lena's sister's kitchen, drinking lukewarm coffee, trying to make sense of the mess life had thrown in front of me. She was in the living room, sitting on the floor with her knees drawn up, flipping through a notebook she'd brought from her old bedroom. Pages full of little sketches, scribbled words, fragments of thoughts she'd jotted down during those 3 days. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but it was like I could feel the weight of everything she'd held inside, the fear, the anger, the small acts of courage that no one else would ever see. And then her phone buzzed. She froze. The room went quiet, even though the hum of the heater filled every corner. I knew before she even looked that it was him, Mark. She stared at it like it was a rattlesnake in her hand. I didn't move. I just watched her shake her head slowly. Then she turned the screen down and muttered almost to herself, "Not again." Her voice was thin, brittle, but there was a steel in it too, the kind that shows up only after someone's been pushed too far. I wanted to grab the phone, throw it in the sink, maybe smash it with a hammer, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She had to do this herself. I remember sitting there, trying to breathe normally, trying not to let my chest explode with anger. I thought about all the small signs I'd missed, the way he watched her, the way her smile sometimes faltered in his presence, even when we were just joking about something stupid like spaghetti sauce. I thought about how easy it is to blame the person being hurt instead of looking at the one doing the hurting. I thought about my own hands, the ones that had held screwdrivers, wires, tools, and how useless they felt in moments like this. I had no tools for this kind of damage. She picked up the phone again, thumb hovering over the screen, and whispered, "I can't let him scare me anymore." Then she dialed. I didn't hear what she said, but a few minutes later, her expression changed. There was relief there, yes, but also that weird, raw exhaustion that comes from finally speaking the truth after holding it in so long. And then she said something that stopped me cold. "I'm done letting him make me small." Those words, simple, ordinary words, carried the weight of everything. I felt my own throat tighten, because in that moment I realized she wasn't just talking to him. She was talking to the whole world, the part of herself that had been caged for years. Later, we went for a walk around the block. It was quiet outside, early evening, the sun dipping behind the trees. I could hear the crunch of gravel under our shoes. She didn't speak at first, just walked beside me, and I felt like I was learning something about courage by osmosis. Then she stopped and looked at me. "You know," she said, "I used to think escaping was the hard part, but it's not. It's surviving afterward, learning that my voice matters, that I can exist without someone controlling it." I nodded. I didn't have words. All I could do was listen. A few days later, we got the official word. Mark had been arrested for a second time. Charges, restraining orders, all the things that make you think justice is simple and neat. But it wasn't neat. It wasn't simple. Lena told me later, I thought this would make everything better, but it doesn't. It just makes me realize how much I've been afraid all my life. And I got it. I really got it. Freedom isn't a moment. It's a series of choices, repeated over and over until fear finally loses its grip. There was a confrontation, too. One I wasn't supposed to witness, but somehow I did. Mark came to the door at Ruth's house. He tried to act normal, like the last few months hadn't happened. I stood a few feet away, pretending to adjust a light fixture. I saw her face harden the way she squared her shoulders. "Leave," she said, just one word. And for the first time, I saw him hesitate. Not because he was afraid of the law, but because he realized he didn't have her anymore. That feeling, that quiet, unshakable realization, hit me harder than anything else in the whole ordeal. There's nothing crueler than someone thinking they have power, than realizing they never did. We spent the evening talking after he left. She told me about the little things she did during those 3 days, how she whispered her plans to herself, how she drew a line in the carpet with her finger to measure the space she still had to breathe, how she repeated words of encouragement quietly like, "I can do this. I am allowed to leave." I couldn't help but marvel at it. Even in the smallest, quietest ways, she had built herself a ladder out of the room that tried to trap her. And I started thinking about life, my choices, my mistakes. How many times had I stayed silent because I was scared? How many times had I let control creep in disguised as concern or responsibility? Watching Lena stand up to him, even in the smallest moments, made me want to face my own ghosts. Made me want to stop pretending that avoidance was the same as strength. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the porch, smoking a cigarette I didn't really enjoy. The wind was sharp, carrying the smell of wet leaves. I thought about the first time I'd met her, about the polite smile that barely reached her eyes, and now, the woman who was learning that her voice mattered. I felt both sadness and hope. Sadness for what she'd endured, hope because she wasn't done yet. Life hadn't finished writing her story, and neither had she. I realized then that this whole thing, the fear, the danger, the helplessness, it was a turning point. Not just for Lena, but for me too. Seeing someone reclaim themselves so quietly, so deliberately, made me think maybe I could do the same in my own life. Maybe there's a moment when the current hits so hard that you have to choose. Stay trapped or pull yourself free. And I knew, for the first time in a long time, what pulling yourself free really looked like. The days after that confrontation felt like walking through fog. Lena was safe, technically, but safe didn't mean the fear had evaporated. She'd sit on the couch, legs pulled up, staring at nothing, and I'd catch myself holding my breath, waiting for the next thing to happen. Most of the time, there wasn't a next thing. Just silence. But silence has weight, heavier than yelling because it makes you listen to yourself, to the little tremors in your own chest. I'd stop by almost every day, sometimes under the pretense of fixing something, a leaky faucet, a light that wouldn't work, a squeaky door hinge. She'd sit there, sketching, writing, or just staring at the wall. Once she looked up at me and said, "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for a disaster that's already passed?" I had to think about that. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual, "all the time. But sometimes waiting helps you notice the cracks you'd ignore otherwise." She nodded, but didn't say anything more. I could tell she was thinking about Mark, about those 3 days, about the long months before that when nothing seemed quite right. One afternoon, we were sitting at the kitchen table, sipping terrible coffee and pretending to be normal. Ruth was off running errands, leaving us alone with the quiet. I asked her what she wanted to do next. She shrugged, tapping her pen against her notebook. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know who I am without him, or if I even remember how to be me." I almost laughed at the honesty, because I'd been there in my own way. "It's like learning to walk again," I said. "You'll stumble, you'll curse at the floor, but eventually you'll get somewhere you want to go." She gave me this small, tired smile, the kind that says she's not ready to hope yet, but maybe she remembers what hope feels like. The phone calls from Mark were a nightmare. One came in while I was helping fix a ceiling fan. Lena froze, hand hovering over the receiver. I could feel the tension in the room like static electricity. "You have to ignore it," I said quietly, trying not to sound like a drill sergeant. "Block it, change the number, do whatever it takes." She nodded, then glanced at me with this faint, ironic smile. "I guess freedom comes with a lot of paperwork," she said. I chuckled low, almost embarrassed for finding humor in such a dark moment, but I couldn't help it. Life's funny that way. Sometimes you laugh to keep from crying. Some nights I'd sit on my porch afterward, staring at the streetlights, thinking about how fragile the human spirit can be. How a person can look perfectly fine from the outside while the inside is a storm. I kept thinking about those 3 days she'd been trapped, the quiet resilience it took to survive. I thought about all the little ways people stay small, how they let someone else decide their space, their time, their voice. And I thought about how courage sometimes comes not in roaring defiance, but in whispering reminders to yourself that you still exist. One evening, she asked me to help her set up a small workspace in the spare room. "I need somewhere to make noise," she said. "Somewhere to remember I can." We spent hours moving boxes, clearing space, and for the first time I saw her energy return a little, a spark, faint but unmistakable. She laughed once when a box tipped over, spilling a stack of old papers. "See, chaos finds me no matter where I go," she said. I grinned because she was right. Chaos does find us, always. The trick is learning to stand in it without letting it swallow you whole. There were moments I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that the past didn't have to define her. But I knew better. Words don't erase trauma. They don't fix doors that were slammed shut or phones ripped away. All you can do is show up, hold a space for someone, and wait while they find their own way back. I'd catch her staring out the window sometimes, lost in thought, and I'd just sit there with her, listening to the sound of her breathing and the faint hum of the refrigerator, feeling the quiet stretch between us like a lifeline. She started volunteering a little, small things at first, handing out food at the shelter, organizing donated clothes. She came home tired, but alive, and each evening she'd tell me about one little thing she'd done that day, like she was collecting proof that she could still exist on her own. "I sorted shoes today," she said one night. "Not just any shoes, I sorted them properly." I laughed, low and warm. "Look at you, conquering the world one pair of sneakers at a time." She smiled, and for the first time in weeks it was easy. Not the nervous smile she used to hide behind, but the quiet, steady one that comes when you start remembering who you are. And still, the fear lingered in shadows. One morning, a delivery man rang the bell and she jumped, almost dropping the package. I reached out, resting my hand on her shoulder. "You're safe," I said. Simple words, but somehow heavy with meaning. She nodded, eyes filling, and I thought about how much easier it is to say those words than to believe them. But she repeated them to herself later, quietly, like a mantra. "I'm safe. I'm allowed to exist. I'm safe." I remember driving home that evening, windows down, feeling the wind slap my face, thinking about all the invisible battles people fight every day. And I realized something: freedom isn't a single moment. It's every tiny decision to stand up, to speak, to move forward when your chest feels like it's packed with cement. Lena was learning that, slowly, painfully, and beautifully. And maybe, in some small way, watching her, I was learning it too. That even when the world feels heavy, even when silence presses against you like a wall, you can still find the space to breathe. And maybe that's the real courage. I remember the first morning I woke up after everything had started to quiet down. Not quiet like nothing happened. The world doesn't let you forget days like that, but quiet in the way of a house after the storm passes. I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, the sun just coming up, and I thought about Lena. Not the scared, trapped woman she'd been, but the one who was learning to breathe again. I could almost picture her in that little spare room, sketching or scribbling, feeling the walls around her shrink a little bit every day. It hit me then, just how much courage it takes to live after fear. To wake up and decide not to let someone else's anger run your life. I spent a lot of mornings like that, sitting with my coffee, thinking about what freedom really meant. Lena had reminded me of something I'd been ignoring for years. How easy it is to let control creep in, even in the small things. My ex-wife had left me long ago, but I realized I'd held onto the idea of her, the memory of our mistakes, like a heavy coat I couldn't shed. Watching Lena reclaim herself made me think maybe I'd been holding my own freedom hostage, too. Funny how seeing someone else fight can remind you of battles you didn't even know you were still fighting. One afternoon, I went back to her place to help fix a flickering kitchen light. She was humming softly, moving around the room like she owned it, and it hit me how much space she'd taken back, not just in the house, but in herself. She laughed at some dumb comment I made about wiring being more complicated than men, and it wasn't the nervous smile she used to hide behind. It was real, quiet, the kind that makes you feel like maybe life is stubborn enough to be kind sometimes. I think I laughed harder than I had in weeks, partly because she was laughing, partly because it reminded me how little moments like that matter when everything else feels heavy. She started leaving the house more, little by little. Grocery runs, walks around the block, even a few errands that required talking to strangers. I could see her standing a little taller, breathing a little deeper, and it was like she was testing the air to see if she could trust it yet. One evening, she called me to show me a photo she'd taken on one of those walks. A tiny field of wildflowers behind a gas station. Nothing remarkable to anyone else. But to her, it was proof she could step outside and still come back. She laughed when she showed it to me. "Look at these little rebels," she said, "growing wherever they can, even in a parking lot." I couldn't help smiling. She had this way of finding humor in the smallest things, and it was contagious. I started thinking about forgiveness too, not just hers, but my own. I thought about all the times I'd held onto resentment like a security blanket, thinking it kept me safe. Lena taught me that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a quiet, steady choice to keep moving forward, even when it hurts. I realized that forgiving Mark, not because he deserved it, but because holding that anger only chained her, only chained me, was part of understanding the kind of freedom we both needed. It's strange, isn't it? How forgiving someone doesn't change what they did, but it can change how you live. I remember one night, sitting in my truck after dropping her off at her sister's, just staring at the stars. I thought about the locks, the silence, the fear, and then about how fragile courage can be. It made me think about all the times I'd thought I had strength, only to discover I'd been fooling myself. And then I smiled quietly because maybe strength isn't something you have all the time. Maybe it's the small choices, the ones you make when nobody's watching, that really count. She started sketching more, writing more, letting the walls of her life hold less and less weight. And I started noticing the small things too. The way a morning breeze can feel like a gift, the sound of a neighbor's dog barking without it ruining your day, the way a joke can sneak in and make you laugh when you thought it was impossible. I think that's what healing looks like, noticing the small sparks again, even after the fire tried to take everything. There were moments, of course, when the past pressed back in. When she flinched at a raised voice in a store, or when I caught her hesitating before opening the door to a stranger. I didn't try to rush her. I just let her move at her own pace, and in that quiet patience, I started to understand what real care meant. It isn't fixing someone. It isn't shielding them from every storm. It's showing up day after day and letting them take back their life in their own time. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about what she'd taught me without even knowing it. That courage can be quiet. That freedom is a process, not a moment. That even after heartbreak, after fear, life can still sneak in, small and persistent, like the wildflowers she photographed. I think the most important lesson was that scars don't disappear, they shouldn't. They're reminders of what you survived, and maybe that's enough. I'd like to think she's smiling more these days, even when no one is looking. I like to think she's learning that life isn't just the absence of fear, but the presence of choice. And me? I'm learning to be a little braver too, in small ways, noticing the sparks again, letting myself feel, letting myself hope. It's not a perfect ending, life never is, but it's a beginning that matters. A quiet kind of beginning, the kind that sneaks in and stays with you